Shalom, my name is Tirsa Lewis with the Rekakad Israeli Beit Midrash. This is a guide to 8th day circumcision. Today we will be looking at 8th day circumcision for Hebrew mothers. This is part of our Sharpening Arrows Hebraic Mothering series. A written version of this video can be found in the description section, and it is also on our website, www.direkakad.com, under the Talmidah portion of our site. So let me just start off with a disclaimer. To begin with, this video is not meant to provide medical advice. I'm not a doctor, a nurse, midwife, or any other licensed medical professional. I'm just a sister in the faith. The purpose of this video is to present to mothers in Hebrew faith the importance of 8th day circumcision from a Torah-based perspective, and to provide tips and ideas on how to achieve 8th day circumcision for their newborn sons within our medical institutions today. Also, this video is not meant to bring condemnation or guilt upon anyone concerning past circumcisions of sons that did not occur on the 8th day, or even future circumcisions of sons that won't occur on the 8th day. The purpose of this video is only meant to uplift and to encourage mothers. And when at the end of this video, I'll give further explanation to this point. So the question that we're going to start out with is, why do we have our sons circumcised on the 8th day? Leviticus 12 verse 3 says, "And in the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised." So it's clear from this Torah command that on the 8th day of life, the foreskin of a newborn male child should be circumcised. We can go back to Abraham to see why the commandment for circumcision originated amongst the Hebrew people. Genesis chapter 17 verses 7 through 14 says, "And I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee, in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be an Elohim unto thee, and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession. And I will be their Elohim. And Elohim said unto Abraham, Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore thou and thy seed after thee in thy generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every male among you shall be circumcised, and ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant between me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every male child, or every man child in your generations. He that is born in the house or bought with money, or any stranger, which is not of thy seed, he that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money, must needs be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh, for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised man-child, whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant." I suggest reading the whole chapter of Genesis chapter 17 to get a clearer context of the covenant that Yahweh made with Abraham. And this is the same chapter in which Yahweh changes Abraham's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah. But we can see a few things from these particular verses. The first thing we can see is that a male child is to be circumcised on their 8th day of life. Keep in mind that the Hebrew day is sunset to sunset. So here are a few examples that illustrate what on the 8th day of life could mean. So if your newborn son is born on Monday at 4:00 a.m., you would have him circumcised anywhere between Sunday evening until Monday evening of the very next week. If he was born on Monday at 3:00 p.m., you'd have him circumcised anytime between Sunday evening until Monday evening of the very next week. And if he was born at Monday at 10:00 p.m., Monday at 10:00 p.m., that began the next Hebrew day. So you'd have him circumcised anywhere between Monday evening until Tuesday evening the very next week. You might have to go back and listen to that a little bit slower, but circumcision occurs on the 8th day of life. So you count 7 whole days, and then on the 8th day, that's when you'll take your son to be circumcised by a licensed medical professional. The second thing that we can see from Genesis chapter 17, verses 7 through 14, is that circumcision is a sign of the covenant that Yahweh made with Abraham. The covenant that Yahweh made with Avram at that time, and he changed his name to Abraham, was that Yah would be the Elohim of Abraham and of his descendants after him forever. And further, that he would bring them into and give them the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession. Included in this covenant are the promises that Abraham's seed will be multiplied greatly and that kings would descend from him. Yahweh specifically says that the covenant was made with Abraham's line through Sarah, which is Isaac, in Genesis chapter 17, verse 19. And then we read in Genesis chapter 24, verse 4, that Isaac was circumcised when he was 8 days old. So when we circumcise our sons on the 8th day, it is a sign of the covenant that Yahweh has made with us and our future generations. That number one, he is our Elohim, and that he will bring us back into the land he promised to give us as an everlasting possession. The third thing we can see from these verses is the importance of circumcision. We can see the importance of circumcision because the penalty for not being circumcised is that you would be cut off from your people. Let's talk about the role of mothers in circumcision, because this is a video for women, Hebrew mothers. First of all, circumcision is something that's done to the 8-day-old son. If you're a new mother, maybe you're pregnant, or maybe you're looking to become pregnant, and you've never had an 8-day-old child, they are not very cognizant of their surroundings. So they're not circumcising themselves, and they're not really necessarily cognizant that the circumcision process is being done to them. So it's clear that the commandment for 8th-day circumcision is a commandment for the parents, and it's based off of the parents' faith. It's based off of our faith in the Most High to circumcise our sons. So when we have sons, it's our duty, again, within our ability in exile, to ensure that our sons are circumcised on the 8th day. This should be a focal point for both parents, for the mother and the father. And I would say that the father should be the main person to ensure that his son, that the commandment is fulfilled for his son. However, the mother may and should also be involved in ensuring that it happens. We can see in Exodus chapter 4, verses 24 through 26, that Moshe's wife Zipporah ensured that their sons were circumcised, even though it was after the 8th day. In addition, we can see in 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verses 60 through 61, that mothers who had their sons circumcised on the 8th day were martyred, and their newborns were hung from their necks. In addition, those who circumcised the sons were also killed. So we can see the sacrifice that it took to keep the command. Let's look at why it's a challenge in America to get your son circumcised on the 8th day. It's a challenge in the United States in exile to get your son circumcised on the 8th day, because although it's a routine thing for male newborns to be circumcised at the hospital, it's normally done a day or two after birth. It's normally done before the baby leaves the hospital. So the focus isn't having it done on the 8th day. The 8th day isn't even a thought in the process of circumcision in America. So the challenge is further made more complicated because once you take your baby home from the hospital, and normally you'll leave the hospital within 1 to 2 days after the child is born. So when you take your baby home from the hospital, many hospitals that I'm aware of won't allow you to bring your baby's son back to the hospital so that he can be circumcised on the 8th day. They will make you take other routes to have the procedure done. And unless you are prepared, you may not be able to have him circumcised on the 8th day. Preparation is key. If you know in advance that you're having a son, you should begin preparing at that moment, if not before. And if you don't know the sex of your child, then you should prepare just in case you have a son. And you should pray about it and have a plan A and a plan B in place. That being said, if you're not able to have your son circumcised on the 8th day and you've done all that you can to make preparation for it, and you've prayed before the Most High, then it's appropriate to have the procedure done when you can have it done, rather than not to have it done at all. So if it is on the 2nd day of life that your son can be circumcised, it's better to have the circumcision procedure done than leaving your son uncircumcised. The situations, there's other situations that may impede 8th day circumcision. And one of those situations that I want to discuss in this video is the birth of a premature or a sick or an unhealthy child. You must use wisdom. You must use discretion in these events. You may not be able to have him circumcised for an extended period of time in these cases. But we recognize that these type of situations are outside of our control. So when we have these situations, we may have a premature, or we may have a sick or unhealthy child who won't be able to have this procedure done on the 8th day, or maybe even at all within his first week or 2 of life, or for even an extended period of time beyond that. We must pray to Yah in these circumstances, and we have to trust in His favor and in His compassion. Life is the goal of the Torah. And so in these events, the life and the wellness of the child supersedes the commandment. For some, it's going to be impossible to have your son circumcised on the 8th day for other reasons. And this would occur if the child is born on a certain day of the week in which there is a holiday on the 8th day. It's very rare that a doctor will be willing to come into the office on a holiday to perform a circumcision. And I say these things to prepare parents for different outcomes that may happen. So just like we have a birth plan, things may not go in the intended direction of our birth plan, but at the same time, we work and we do our part to try to bring about the expected outcome. I want to talk about tips on how to get your son circumcised on the 8th day. And these are some tips that I have gathered over the last 10 years that I've had a son. The first thing to do is to plan ahead. Don't wait until your son or your child, if you don't know the sex, is born to think about how you're going to get him circumcised on the 8th day. You should make plans ahead of time. You should make preparation, just like you're preparing the nursery and you're preparing and getting a car seat to leave the hospital. Thinking about this 8th day circumcision thing should be part of that planning process. The second thing I would suggest as a tip is to speak to families in your community. Ask them how they went about circumcising their sons on the 8th day. You may be able to use the same doctors that they used. The third tip I have is to speak to your OB or to speak to your midwife and explain to them that it's important to you to have your son circumcised on the 8th day. Here are a few questions that you could ask. The first question is, if you're having a hospital birth, you can ask if you're able to bring your son back to the hospital on the 8th day to be circumcised. Again, a lot of hospitals that I'm aware of in Pittsburgh and a few other locations in the U.S. Don't allow this. However, you may be at a hospital that is willing to accommodate you on this. The second thing to ask is, do they, which would be the OB or the midwife practice, perform the circumcisions in the hospital? Because if your OB is the one that's performing the circumcisions, you can ask if you can come to their doctor office to have the procedure fulfilled on the 8th day. So you won't be able to go back to the hospital to have it done by them. But a lot of times, if the doctor or the midwife is the one performing the circumcision at the hospital, they'll allow you to come into their doctor's office in order to do the circumcision procedure. The third question to ask is that if you're having a birth center or a home birth, you can ask your midwife or your doctor if you're able to make an appointment at the hospital. Because a lot of times these midwives and these doctors, they have backup hospitals. But you can ask if you can make an appointment at the hospital that they're affiliated with on the 8th day. Or you can ask them if there's any hospitals they're aware of that you can schedule the circumcision for the 8th day. The fourth question to ask is, do they know of any doctors or surgeons who would be able to accommodate your request? Because a lot of times, if they've had thousands, hundreds of patients, a lot of times people may have come to them with these concerns, and maybe they have experience and they know of doctors or surgeons who they have known in the past who have accommodated people who requested 8th day circumcision. The fourth tip I have is to research doctors and surgeons that perform circumcisions. You will find that some family doctors actually perform circumcisions. So you can call your insurance company for help, or you could look online and speak to your family doctor or your pediatrician. Ask them if they perform circumcisions. Ask them if they know of any other doctors that perform circumcisions. And you can call these doctors that you find, and you can explain your request to them and see if they will accommodate you. Sometimes you'll have to actually speak to the doctor as opposed to the secretary answering the phone. A lot of times the person answering the phone isn't aware of anyone who wants this request. And so sometimes if you speak to the doctor himself or herself, you might have more success with going with that doctor practice. The fifth tip I have is to contact the Jewish community. The Jewish community has ritual circumcisers called moils. It's Mohels, moils. The situation with moils is that a lot of times their certification and their liability insurance is limited to the synagogue system. So they won't circumcise children that are not inside of their synagogue system. But there are some moils who have insurance and different things where they're able to circumcise children that they deem to be Gentiles or children that aren't within the synagogue system. Now, if they agree to circumcise your child, they won't perform the circumcision if it's on a Sabbath day or a holy day. So you should be prepared for that. Also be humble when speaking to them, because remember that they're performing a service for you and your child and not the other way around. So there shouldn't be any room for arguing or for any, anger or anything like that. It's really just asking them if they're willing to perform the service for you. And if they're not, then, that's fine too. You should expect to pay cash if you're getting a moil to do the circumcision. And I've seen anywhere between $300 to $1,000. Normally, they don't accept health insurance. So if you went to a doctor, it would be under neonatal circumcision. But when you go to a moil, normally they only accept cash payments. The sixth tip I have is to make sure that you understand in advance any requirements that doctors or moils may have to perform the circumcision. So some doctors and surgeons require 2 pediatric checkups before they'll circumcise a male child. Others may require a vitamin K shot. Remember that a vitamin K shot is a vitamin and it's not a vaccine. So it's not, it doesn't have those doesn't have any harmful types of chemicals in them. But knowing the requirements up front will prevent any disappointment when it comes time to have the procedure performed. So you don't want to walk in and you didn't do all the prerequisites. You don't want to walk in on the 8th day and you didn't have the vitamin K shot, or you didn't do the doctor visits, or whatever they may require. I will speak about my personal experience now. For both of our sons, me and my husband and I, we were able to arrange 8th day circumcision. My first son was born 10 years ago, and my second son was born almost 2 years ago. And in both situations, it was very stressful for me. But I had to give it to Yah. I had to give it to him because if it was going to happen, it was going to happen because of the Most High. So with our first son, we had a birth center birth, and we was able to arrange for a doctor to circumcise him on the 8th day in his doctor's office. And we also had a plan B, which was to set up an appointment at the hospital for the 8th day. With our second son, I had a hospital birth, and my OB practice performed circumcisions at the hospital. So they agreed to allow us to come back to the doctor's office on the 8th day because the hospital that I was in would not allow me to bring the baby back to the hospital. And with the second circumcision, we had to agree to allow our son to have the vitamin K shot. In conclusion, I hope that this video encourages mothers. Again, as I said at the beginning, this is not a message of condemnation towards anyone. I don't want women to feel guilt if something happens that prevents them from being able to have their son circumcised on the 8th day. That is not the purpose of this video. We have to flow, in my Hebraic Womanhood 101 series, I speak about flowing. We can't be legalistic and we can't be bound up, and we have to think about the fact that we are not in our land. If we was in our land, we'd be able to practice this very special rite of passage without any obstacles. But since we are in exile, and this land and this people, they don't understand the Torah. They're not living according to the Torah. They're not living according to the ways of the Most High. So we can't expect them to necessarily bend to our will and give us what we want. So we pray that Yah provides for us to be able to obey the command, and then we make preparation up front to keep the command. But at the end, it's going to be the Most High who brings about the increase. We have to realize this, and we have to have a reasonable perspective of this commandment in light of where we are, being in exile. When Israel functioned as a nation, we had experts. We had access to experts to circumcise our sons on the 8th day. And, we don't have those experts any longer in America, at least not in the Hebrew communities that I'm aware of. So Yah bless you, and Yah bless our sons to be men of the covenant, to be men that are the inheritance of the promise given to Abraham, to Yitzhak, and to Yaakov. Hallelujah. Again, my name is Tirza Lewis with the Rekakad Israeli Beit Midrash. This was a guide to 8th day circumcision. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comment section of this video. Or you can send me an email, direcakad.oneway@gmail.com. Again, our website is www.direcakad.com. Yah bless and shalom.